Imagine a structure so precisely designed that every room, every piece of furniture, every material, every color meant something specific. And when you finally understood the code, you were looking at the entire story of how God saves people. Not a metaphor, not a rough sketch. The complete architecture of redemption, built in fabric and bronze and gold, assembled in the wilderness and walked through by an entire nation for generations. Here's what most people don't realize. The New Testament assumes you already know this system. The book of Hebrews quotes it constantly. Revelation is built on its imagery. Paul drops references to it that modern readers simply glide past. And yet the vast majority of Christians today have almost no idea what this system actually was, how it worked, or why God designed it the way He did. We've inherited a Bible full of references to the sanctuary, and we've reduced it to a kid's Bible school coloring page. In this video, we're going to walk through the entire sanctuary system from the ground up, what it was, how it worked, what each element meant, and why understanding it changes how you read almost everything else in your Bible. Because here's the pattern that most people completely miss. Every single element of the sanctuary, every piece of furniture, every ritual, every material was designed with the same directional logic. Every element moves you closer to God. That one idea, once you see it, unlocks the whole structure. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start at the beginning. The first thing you need to understand is that the sanctuary system was not Israel's idea. It was God's. In Exodus 25, verses 8 and 9, God gives Moses a specific command with a specific reason attached. He says, "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." And then immediately he adds the crucial qualifier, "Build it exactly according to the pattern I show you." The Hebrew word used for the sanctuary here is mishkan, spelled mem shin kaf nun. The root of mishkan means to dwell, to settle, to take up residence among. The name itself is a theological statement. This wasn't a temple designed to keep God at a comfortable distance. It was a dwelling place designed because God wanted proximity to His people. But that raises an immediate problem. And this is the theological tension the entire system was built to resolve. A perfectly holy God cannot simply move in next door to a sinful people without some kind of mediation. The presence of absolute holiness and unaddressed sin in the same space is not a serene spiritual experience. In the language of the Old Testament, it is dangerous. The sanctuary was God's solution to that problem. It was heaven's condescension to earth's limitation, a structured pathway that allowed sinful human beings to approach a holy God, not by pretending the problem didn't exist, but by addressing it systematically, step by step. Hebrews 8 verses 1 through 5 tells us something remarkable about this. The writer explains that the earthly sanctuary was not invented from scratch. It was built as a shadow and a copy of something already existing in heaven, a heavenly original that Moses was shown on the mountain. The earthly system, in other words, was a visible, tactile, walk-through model of a heavenly reality. Israel didn't just read about God's plan of redemption, they lived inside it. They entered it with their bodies. They smelled the incense and the burnt offerings. They watched the blood. They saw the light of the lampstand. This was a visual curriculum for an entire nation, and it operated for centuries. And remember that governing framework, because we'll return to it again and again. Every element moves you closer to God. Now let's walk through the structure, starting from the outermost point and moving inward. The moment an Israelite entered the outer court of the sanctuary, the first thing they encountered was an altar. This was the bronze altar of burnt offering, a large, imposing structure made of acacia wood, overlaid with bronze. This is where sacrifices were made. This is where an animal died in place of the worshiper. And the theological logic here is stated plainly in Leviticus 17 verse 11, one of the most direct doctrinal statements in the entire Torah. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by the life." The word for atonement in Hebrew is kafar, which means to cover, to purge, to wipe away. Before anyone moved further into the sanctuary, before any approach to God could continue, something had to die. The penalty for sin had to land somewhere. The altar made sure it landed on a substitute rather than on the worshiper. What's significant here is the sequence. Sin must be addressed before cleansing. Cleansing must happen before service. This order is theologically non-negotiable in the system, and it's not arbitrary. It reflects a logic about the nature of holiness that the entire New Testament builds on. The altar looks forward unmistakably to the cross. Every animal laid on that bronze structure was a recurring visual statement that the wages of sin is death, and that God in His mercy had provided a substitute. Past the altar, still in the outer court, the priest encountered the bronze laver. This was a large basin of water, and the priests were required to wash their hands and feet before entering the holy place. The sequence is telling. First, the sacrifice, the blood, then the washing, the cleansing. You could not reverse the order. Scholars note that this structure echoes throughout the New Testament in the pairing of the cross and baptism, in Paul's language in Titus 3:5 about the washing of regeneration, in the sequence of justification and sanctification. The outer court, with just these two objects, mapped out the entire logic of initial salvation. Atonement first, cleansing second. Every element moves you closer to God. Now we step inside the tent structure itself, into the holy place. The holy place was a long rectangular room, accessible only to the priests, lit not by sunlight, but by the golden lampstand. There were three objects here, and together they describe something different from the outer court. The outer court was about entry, about the conditions required to approach it all. The holy place is about sustaining the relationship once access has been granted. This is the zone of ongoing life with God. On one side of the room was the table of showbread, 12 loaves of bread, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, placed before God every Sabbath and renewed weekly. This wasn't a meal God ate. It was a symbolic statement about provision and relationship, that all 12 tribes were perpetually held before the face of God, and that God in turn sustained His people. The Hebrew phrase for this bread is lechem hapanim, which literally means bread of the face or bread of the presence. To be held before the face of God, that's the idea. The presence of the bread week after week communicated that the relationship was ongoing, not merely transactional. On the other side stood the menorah, the 7-branched golden lampstand burning pure olive oil, never allowed to go out. In the windowless holy place, this was the only light. 7 branches, perfect number, perpetual flame. Scholars who have studied the menorah's symbolism consistently connect it to the concept of divine illumination, wisdom, the presence of the Spirit, the light of God sustaining those who minister before Him. When Revelation describes the 7 golden lampstands in its opening vision, it's drawing directly on this imagery. And at the far end of the holy place, closest to the inner veil, the most intimate point of daily priestly ministry, stood the altar of incense. This small golden altar was where incense burned morning and evening, every single day. In both the Old Testament and the New, incense ascending is explicitly connected to prayer rising to God. In Psalm 141:2, David prays that his prayer would rise like incense before God. In Revelation 5:8 and 8:3, the incense before the throne is identified directly as the prayers of the saints. The altar of incense stood just on the threshold of the most sacred space in the universe. To stand at that altar and offer incense was as close as an ordinary priest ever got to the direct presence of God. And what that closeness looked like was prayer. Every element moves you closer to God. Now we reach the center of everything, the moment that defines the entire system. Between the holy place and the innermost room hung the veil. This was not a light curtain. Ancient sources describe it as several inches thick, woven from blue, purple, and scarlet thread, worked with the figures of cherubim. Its colors were significant: blue for heaven, purple for royalty, scarlet for sacrifice. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, and it was a barrier. On this side, the holy place, the realm of priestly ministry, the zone of ongoing relationship. On the other side, the most holy place, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the place where God's presence physically dwelt between the cherubim. The veil was not simply a privacy screen, it was a theological statement: this far and no further. The separation between God's unmediated holiness and sinful humanity was real and required acknowledgement. Behind the veil sat the Ark of the Covenant, an acacia wood chest overlaid with gold, containing 3 items: the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod that had budded, and a jar of manna. The law, the authority of the priesthood, and the memory of God's provision, all sealed inside. Above the ark was its golden lid, flanked by 2 golden cherubim with wings spread, facing downward. This lid was called the mercy seat. In Hebrew, kapareth, from that same root kafar we encountered at the bronze altar: to cover, to atone. Once a year, on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, described in exhaustive detail in Leviticus 16, the high priest alone entered through that veil with the blood of a sacrifice. He would sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat directly above the ark containing the broken law. The picture is almost shockingly clear. The blood of atonement placed between the righteous demands of God's law and the people who had broken it, mercy covering judgment. Now here is one of the most remarkable lexical bridges in the entire Bible, and most people walk right past it. In Romans 3:25, when Paul is describing what Christ accomplished on the cross, he writes that God presented Jesus as a hilasterion through faith in his blood. That Greek word, hilasterion, it's the exact same word the Greek translation of the Old Testament uses to translate Kipporeth, the mercy seat. Paul isn't using a vague theological term, he's using the specific technical name for the lid of the Ark of the Covenant and applying it directly to Jesus. Christ is the mercy seat. Christ is the place where divine wrath and divine mercy converge, where the blood is presented, where the demands of the law are covered by sacrifice. And on the Day of Atonement, there was a second part that's often overlooked. 2 goats were selected, one was sacrificed, its blood brought into the most holy place. The other, the scapegoat, was brought before the high priest, who would lay both hands on its head and confess over it all the sins of the entire nation. Then the goat was led out into the wilderness and released, carrying the sins of the people away from the community entirely. Sin was not merely covered, it was removed. The Yom Kippur ritual addressed sin with a comprehensiveness that the regular daily sacrifices did not. Both the penalty and the presence of guilt dealt with completely on a single day every year. And then something happened in the first century that every person who knew the sanctuary system would have immediately recognized for what it was. In Matthew 27, verses 50 and 51, at the moment Jesus breathes his last on the cross, the Gospel records a single physical event in the temple. The veil, that thick, magnificent, theologically loaded curtain, tore in 2 from top to bottom, not from the bottom up, as if a human hand had grabbed it, from the top down. The sanctuary was not being vandalized, it was making an announcement. The barrier between God's presence and humanity had been removed, not because the barrier was illegitimate, but because the only thing that could legitimately remove it had just been accomplished. The system was not being discarded, it was declaring itself fulfilled. Every element moves you closer to God, and now there was nothing left standing in the way. Which brings us to the human figure at the center of the entire structure, the one without whom none of it worked: the high priest. In the sanctuary system, The priest was not a distant official administering religious procedures. He was the living hinge of the entire system, the mediator who stood between the people and God, who carried the people into God's presence, and who brought God's mercy back out to the people. His garments alone tell the story. The ephod, the breastplate set with 12 precious stones, one for each tribe, inscribed with their names. When the high priest entered the most holy place, he literally carried Israel on his chest and on his shoulders. The entire nation was held before God in the person of a single representative. But here's what every student of the Old Testament eventually has to reckon with. The high priest was himself a sinner. He had to offer sacrifice for his own sins before he could offer sacrifice for the people's sins. The system was functional. God had instituted it and honored it, but it was also visibly incomplete. It had to be repeated, year after year after year. The same rituals, the same blood, the same veil, the same entry and exit. The repetition itself was a theological statement. This system is pointing forward to something that will not need to be repeated. The book of Hebrews is, in many ways, the New Testament's extended theological commentary on exactly this incompleteness and its resolution. Beginning in chapter 7 and running through chapter 10, the writer systematically unpacks what the sanctuary system was doing and what it was pointing toward. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 11 through 14, describes Jesus as a high priest who entered not the earthly tabernacle, but the greater and more perfect tabernacle, the heavenly original that the earthly copy was always shadowing. He entered not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, securing not temporary atonement, but eternal redemption. What Israel's high priests enacted annually in ritual, Christ accomplished once, finally, in reality. And then Hebrews 10 verses 19 through 22 draws the conclusion that the entire system was always building toward. Because of what Christ accomplished, we, ordinary people, not just a single high priest on a single day, now have confidence to enter the most holy place itself. Not the earthly room behind a physical veil, the very presence of God. The access that the entire sanctuary system was gesturing toward is now open. The directional logic of the whole structure, every element moving you closer to God, has reached its destination. This is what Israel knew, and what we have largely forgotten. They lived inside a visual theology every single day. Every time a sacrifice was made, they understood that sin has consequences and mercy requires a substitute. Every time the priests washed at the laver, they understood that holiness requires cleansing. Every week when the showbread was renewed, they understood that their relationship with God was sustained by His provision, not their performance. Every morning, when the incense rose from the golden altar, they understood that prayer is the breath of the covenant relationship. And once a year, when the high priest disappeared behind the veil with blood in his hands, every Israelite watching understood that access to God's presence is not casual, not presumptuous, not earned. It is granted through a mediator, accomplished through sacrifice, and received by faith. The sanctuary system was not ceremonial decoration. It was not ancient furniture. It was the operating system of the entire redemption story, a compressed visual gospel that a whole nation walked through with their bodies for generations. And the reason Hebrews is so dense, the reason Paul's theology is so layered, the reason Revelation's imagery is so thick and architectural, is because all of it assumes that you already speak this visual language. The tabernacle was never about the building. It was always about the access. And the deepest message of the entire system, the message that every altar, every basin, every lampstand, every incense offering, every high priest was preaching over and over for centuries, is that drawing near to God has always required mediation, sacrifice, cleansing, and an intercessor. Jesus did not invent those categories. He fulfilled the ones already operating, the ones that had been painted in blood and gold and smoke across the center of Israelite life for 1,000 years. When the veil tore, it was not the end of the story. It was the story arriving at the moment it had always been heading toward. If this video gave you a new angle on the sanctuary system, share it with someone who grew up reading past Exodus 25. And if you want to go deeper into the patterns and structures of the Old Testament that most people walk right past, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is here to do.